Herman Yau was a celebrated Hong Kong director whom we have talked about in the first episode of Asian Trips when we reviewed The Sleep Curse, starring his longtime collaborator Anthony Wong. In the review, I mentioned that his contribution to the Hong Kong horror cinematic scene did not stop at the likes of The Untold Story and The Sleep Curse. Over the years, notable horror titles Yau had directed included Nightmare in Precinct 7 in 2001, Dating Deaths in 2004, 17 Years Buried in 2004, and Gong Tao, and Oriental Black Magic in 2007. In 1997, Herman Yau and director Nam Yin created a horror anthology franchise known as Troublesome Night or Yang Yong Lo, with stories provided by young screenwriters and casting budding actors mostly from the TVB broadcasting station. Troublesome Night would become a box office hit. The franchise would be expanded to 20 movies strong, with Herman Yau directing the first 6 installments between 1997 to 1999, and returned to do the spiritual sequel Always Be With You in 2017. Today in Asian Trips, there will be a bonus film as we looked into the first 4 Troublesome Night that Yau directed. The first Troublesome Night comprised of 4 stories in which some characters intertwined and having a narrator Peter who will become a character in the last 2 segments. To be honest, it was quite a mess, but it did not distract from the stories themselves. The first story was about a group of hot-blooded chaps meeting a bunch of girls of around their age, having a ball of a time on an island away from civilization. As young people do, there was always the test of courage, and naturally, they would dabble into supernatural talks and experiences. During a serious case of dare, our protagonist Ken went to do the forbidden and paid the ultimate price. This was a strong segment to start the movie with. The story was nothing foreign to young people on the global scale, and the island part of the plot reminded me of a couple of creepy islands offshore of Singapore. The young people were indulging in the usual shenanigans, yet they were not awfully obnoxious, and this movie perhaps helped transition Louis Koo from a TVB actor to a budding movie star, and his compatriot Ada Choi helped balance the female side of the cast. In the second story, we have the screen goddess of the 1990s, Christy Chong, playing a role of a wife who was getting excited to celebrate her wedding anniversary, going the extra mile to appease her hubby with a much vaunted timepiece. Little did she know that, on this stormy night, the husband was with his mistress and got into an argument en route to his celebration, leading to a tragic outcome. Serve him right for contemplating of cheating when your wife is Christy Chong. The title of this segment was exactly the same as the movie, which stood for a crossroad between the world of the living and the dead. In the melodramatic twist, the couple will reconcile, but not without many heart-stopping scares the wife would suffer along the way. The third story sort of linked with the first 2 stories, albeit rather weakly. Jojo accompanied Ken's buddies to pay respect to him in the columbarium, and just a passing remark about the deceased husband from story 2 saw her being bothered by a lecturer's ghost. I certainly felt like this segment was written with the sole purpose of putting the actress who played Jojo, Teresa Mark, to be put into some promiscuous plotline to appease fans of hers who had typecasted her as a Category 3 actress during this time. However, the trope of not putting in your best behavior and treating everything with respect in places like the columbarium and cemetery is a serious matter to inculcate to the viewers. The final story was a standalone one about an actor watching his horror movie during a midnight showing in a cinema with his partner. A couple of well-known superstitions were highlighted in this segment. Firstly, dedicated seats in cinema of certain East Asian countries were reserved for the dead, and if you have occupied them by mistake, be prepared to suffer the wrath. Secondly, the concept of gui da qiang, or having you be disoriented, running into the same space over and over again by a supernatural force, was also being used succinctly in this story. Other than that, the humor was the usual Hong Kong movie standards, and felt like this was being a coerced segment, with the narrator being involved for the sake of having some connective tissues with the rest of the movie. The first Troublesome Night had its moments. I especially enjoyed the first story. The ghost story's plot lines were familiar to the audience in Hong Kong and resonated with other Chinese markets around the world as well. It felt like a movie that required very little budget, and production could be wrapped up within a week or two, which was why, with the success of the first movie, the same production team was able to create a sequel within the same year of 1997. Herman Yau also created a sort of like his bunch of players, with the likes of Louis Koo, Alan Ting, Simon Louis, and Frankie Ng and Christine Ng from The Last Story to be recurring cast members for the multiple sequels that followed. The characters they would play in this franchise generally were not consistent in terms of personality and motives, but it did help to give the franchise a lot of familiarity and a sort of kinship the audience were banked upon. My rating for the first Troublesome Night would be 7 out of 10. The sequel, as mentioned, was released in the same year and was given the subtitle of Mo Zoi Nei Zoi Yao, translated as I'm by your side. It was based off a song title from the olden days, which was itself from the tune of a Korean folk song, but generally was meant to emphasize that although someone had died, his or her spirit is likely to be around you always. The song itself was not as creepy as a tune like other old songs played on the gramophone. There was an overarching frame across 3 stories in this movie. It involved 3 radio DJs who hosted a late night show which they would share ghost stories and allowed listeners to call in to share their own ghost stories at around 1 in the morning. The first segment told the story of a guy who was tragically killed by a killer litter from a high-rise apartment building. When his distraught girlfriend called in the station to seek advice, the DJ by the name Longhair told her to reconcile with her deceased boyfriend by ending her own life. At a point of vulnerability, the poor girl heeded his advice, but what followed, besides the controversies that the radio station had handled, was that Longhair would be haunted by the spirit of this lady, and deservingly so. The second story talked about a relaxing cruise turned deadly. One of the DJs were joined by a couple of childhood friends of Longhair as they mourned his death, felt that a relaxing cruise with an opportunity to meet girls would be the ideal way to heal their wounds. Together with a lady whom they had paid for some dubious phone services and the ship captain, the trio set out to sea. Their voyage was riddled with strange events like picking up a stowaway, discovering a carcass of a pig in the waters, and their food had been infested with cockroaches. This led to a gruesome and mind-blowing revelation that put the lives of everyone at risk. There was that interesting banter between the 3 actors, which we will revisit down the line. The scares were rather lukewarm, and perhaps due to the limited space of the location, which was the yacht, it felt like director Herman and his team had their hands tied. Still, it was an interesting change of scenery, and the perils of the waters in the Chinese superstition could never be overlooked. Well-known TVB actors Cheong Tak Ming and Wayne Lai would make their first appearances in this franchise, and the rapport they built with Simon Louis will come in handy in future sequel. The final story was about another DJ, Sam, played by Louis Koo, who did not join the tragic fun cruise but was equally affected by the death of his colleague Longhair. Being an avid biker who indulged in illegal street racing, Sam would be triggered to join more death-defying bike races. This weekly plotted segment, which involved the loss of Zhua Jiao Ti, when the soul of someone who had a traumatic and grievous death on the road, wanting some unsuspecting person to replace said soul so that he or she could head for reincarnation. There was also the concept like a final destination when the killing machine is destined to claim a life, but it was non-discriminatory on who the victim is. This segment starred the renowned action director Chin Ka-lok, who would appear in future sequels as well. Troublesome Night 2 for sure did not live up to the popularity of the original movie, but the fact that it was released merely months from the first movie made you wonder if these stories failed to make the original cut and were relegated into a flimsy sequel. However, it helped that there was an overarching frame with characters that were involved in the different stories and not just a lame narrator as in the first movie. For me, Troublesome Night 2 merely deserved a 5.5 out of 10. Half a year later in 1998, Troublesome Night 3 premiered with a secondary title of Seng Kun Fat Choi, a play on the idiom which usually was a greeting people made to wish their loved ones on their career promotions, Seng Kun, which naturally lead to getting richer, Fat Choi. The Chinese character Choi here referred to coffin, which tied to the profession of our cast of characters. Louis Koo's character Lick led a funeral service company, himself being a sales manager, and his motley crew of friends were morticians, Taoist priests, a musician who specialized in the Chinese horn instrument suona, and other people who worked odd jobs in the company. The first story was a pretty sad one, with Alan Ting returning as a mortician by the name of Shiseido. He was infatuated with a singer, with his idolizing reaching fever pitch, and was well known among his friends and colleagues. His idol would meet her demise from a tragic car accident, and Shiseido was assigned to do the ratification of the deceased's appearance before the cremation. Being her biggest fan, he of course was determined to do a good job, even when her face was badly mangled from the trauma of the accident. He then went through a myriad of emotions and putting in a lot of his private feelings into his professional duty, which escalated to a boiling point, leading Shiseido to make an incredulous decision. The second story involved the Taoist priest and that pair of odd jobbers. Simon Louis, with his mixed ethnicity, looks a bit hilarious in a priest robe and was chanting the Zhao Hun, or recalling a soul mantra. The trio would swindle the returning Christine Ng, who portrayed a daughter who had been living overseas and was not around during the passing of her aged mother, and was guilty and wanted to do a proper ritual to allow her to have a proper afterlife. This segment also marked the appearance of Helena Lawlan in her signature character Long Po, who would be a flag bearer for the Troublesome Night franchise. As the ghost of the deceased mother, she would be haunting the apartment and causing grievous attack via high-rise littering and poltergeist activities. She would later make the swindlers suffer a series of traumatizing scares for their misdeeds. I had no real affection for this series of slapstick humor, and I felt the threat of Long Po was very much diminished in her first appearance. The final story was about an unrequited love affair. Well-known celebrities Fanny Yuan and Michael Tzu would make their presence felt. The former was the senior mortician of the company, the latter a wealthy playboy by the awful pretentious name of Daviv, who would fall head over heels for Hong, the mortician. Their mutual attraction escalated their relationship to a point that there were talks of marriage. Not before long, Hong's profession, in which she will be dealing with cops on a daily basis, was something Daviv found highly objectionable, to a stage of loathing being with Hong herself. After a cruel rejection from the man she had loved so dearly, Hong would do the unthinkable, leading to a well-structured haunting of the ungrateful man. It was also in this segment that we realized that Louis Koo character's Lick had a crush on Hong for the longest time and had been keeping it concealed to keep things professional between them. Louis Koo would go on to give an award-winning performance for a genre film like this. Troublesome Night 3 ended with a very heart-wrenching note, but this third installment was not a noteworthy feature in this franchise, for me at least. 6 out of 10 was the best I could muster within me for this movie. Troublesome Night 4, subtitled as Yu Guai Tong Hang, which simply meant travelling with the ghost. A pleasant change of scenery, as we have the prologue to introduce all the characters on a plane en route from Hong Kong to Manila. Louis Koo played a young husband who travelled with his gorgeous wife, played by Singaporean pageant queen Pauline Sung. The cheeky triumvirate of Simon Louis, Chang Tak Ming, and Wayne Lai we saw from Troublesome Night 2 all roused out for a tour to solicit for prostitution while joining a tour group. Timmy Hung, son of Sammo Hung, played a courier who was ignorant of the parcel he was to deliver. There was even a cameo of well-known director-producer-actor Raymond Wong, playing a prominent businessman having a shady overseas tryst with his mistress, but the pair engaged in a running joke of the multiple hotels they were staying in being haunted, not a vote of confidence for the tourism board of Philippines. We started a courier service with Timmy Hung, an actor who have gained traction over the years, mainly on television, without much nepotism as what was reported, and actually evident through his career progression. Timmy played Alan, who found out that he was transporting an urn with ashes of a deceased when he was being stopped and questioned by the immigration officers in the airport. Feeling creeped out by this parcel, Alan would be assisted by a local contact from his company as they made a long and arduous journey away from the city central to return the ashes to the family. Along the way, the deceased made her appearance, which of course was not part of the deal for the courier, and there was instances when Ellen wanted to bail out but was chastised by the local contact. In the end, there was a major swerve in the storyline which was kind of bittersweet. Timmy displayed his comedic chops in this first story, but I enjoyed the road trip part on the roads of Manila. The scares were decent, especially a local elderly as a ghost. We got acquainted with the young couple of Wing and Apple, who had a delightful time on the streets of Manila until the wife spotted a portrait of herself in a painting store. She encountered a clairvoyant lady who told her some forthcoming events would happen, which triggered her skepticism from the onset. The first few events started to transpire, and Apple became suspicious that the lady was truly predicting their future as she yearned to know more about it. One of the premonitions was that Wing will be bearing a child with another woman out of wedlock, which drove Apple mad and started to ruin the couple's travels with their squabbling. The mistrust was not unwarranted, as some local Jezebel had her eyes on Wing and was forefront with her approach. It was always an uphill battle for the couple, and as audience, you have to watch how it unravels. The final story involved that libidinous trio of guys who had been itching to depart from their tour group to meet some promiscuous local women of the night. After moving from hotel to hotel, bemoaning at the lack of action they had desired, the group arrived in this rustic hotel. Simon Louis' character will move to a room opposite one that's strictly prohibited by the hotel staff to stay in. It was an instant red flag for those who knew what was up. Simon will be lured by a seductive woman from that specific room, and things of course did not end well for him, resulting him in doing a Borat, going stark naked in the hotel. At the meantime, his buddies were tipsy, both with alcohol and intoxicated by a flirtatious lady, inviting them to a discotheque where she claimed would be filled with gorgeous ladies of Manila. Despite being scared out of his clothes, literally for Louis' character, he still possessed the bravado to join his buddies on a mystifying journey to this elusive discotheque. On the surface, the trio hit the jackpot, arriving at a location that would saturate their lustful needs, but we knew it was more than meets the eye. What transpired was a classic zombie survival flick with interesting urban scenery of Manila of the late 1990s, which was intriguing for me to see them meandering through some really mind-boggling, risky, dilapidated landscapes. Then came the comedic banter I was talking about between the trio at the brink of them losing their lives. The conversations tickled me effortlessly when I knew the context was lowbrow, but it worked at that climax. Overall, Troublesome Night 4 was more entertaining than the preceding two installments and might even rival the original movie, even though the supernatural aspects was something more foreign since the story was based away from Hong Kong, yet the exploration of human nature and certain human sentimentality was universal generally. I'm awarding the third sequel of the franchise a 7 out of 10. I hope that you guys enjoyed these Asian trips with a bonus film, and if anyone will be interested in more sequels of the Troublesome Night franchise, do drop a comment. Although without Herman Yau's involvement after the 6th movie, I will be apprehensive to proceed. Please click a like, which would mean a lot to me, and subscribe to this channel if you can. Stephen Connecty, 825 Forest Road, a haunted house feature with substantial world building, was my previous review on this channel. It was fun while it lasted, but going through 20 movies, especially 19 in such close proximity, it was really an overkill, but I suppose there was market for these movies during that time.